Welcome to Clair Obscur Expedition 33 No Spoiler Madman Review. Review key was provided by the publisher, but that doesn't affect my thoughts in any way. Played the game for about 70 hours and finished most of the endgame content before deciding to finish it all due to other games coming out. Before I even start, congrats to Sandfall Studio for creating a proper bloody new IP video game. Expedition 33, let's abbreviate it to 33 for future references, is a wholesome, incredible experience that goes to show what developers without cuffed hands and with a proper gamer's vision can create with no ulterior motives or cheap dopamine tricks. 33 is a deep game on many major fronts. It's not just a story game and it's not just a combat game, it's everything, and due to its success hopefully opens up new paths for other developers stuck under non-gaming oriented publishers and shareholders where only relevant vision is the green one. So let's get started with the review, you artistic bastards. First up, the story. No spoilers, don't worry. It's truly incredible. I can see why some would say it's a masterpiece. No argument here from me. Especially when eventually everything is uncovered. I was afraid that the great intro, emotional twists and massive questions won't be properly concluded, or it would be underwhelming. Instead, it ended up being one of the most emotional and human stories in games of this type. Sure, there are much smaller games that focus on the human tragedy, but for such an extensive game to have that type of a conclusion is something I have rarely seen. From the start, big questions pop up in the player's mind. It's inevitable due to how the story is segmented. The whole gommage thing, many expeditions trying to stop it, the artistic world, interesting looking enemy types and NPCs, villains starting to appear, a very appealing world with its own secrets like the whole tribe of funny warriors. Player is going to want to finish the game just to see what everything is all about, and can it even end happily? Oh man, the twists that people playing 33 for the first game are going to experience, especially the ending. Story overall is brilliant, with an incredible ending. The way it builds up and unfolds is so well done. Pacing is also great, even with the world map exploration. There's a bunch of things on the side that connect somehow to the story, so that the player rarely feels disconnected. For example, previous expedition journals scattered across the world. In Acts 1 and 2 the game does a great job of forcing the player to go through story locations to unlock new means of transportation, which then unlocks a few new areas, but not some insane amount where players would lose completely the point of what they are here to do in the first place. Well done, Sandfall. Characters are also very nicely done, all quite deep and quite human. One of the most human in-game characters I've seen yet. The way they talk, their backstories, the way they change emotions, handle discussions, their stellar facial expressions, astounding. Also, all the characters are somewhat interesting without political agendas behind them. Some more interesting, some less. Meili can be a bit too whiny and annoying, but she is a kid, so it makes sense. They all know the futility of this whole endeavor, but continue to push on no matter what. And then when the doubt starts creeping in, when despair takes over, there's plenty of events where each character is tested in a way. 33 is a sad game, but not because it forces the sadness, but because the sadness comes naturally through the story progression. More it progresses, the sadder it gets. Developers though have smartly introduced a very interesting warrior race as comic relief to combat the sadness, and it works great. Then some other interesting creatures Expedition was hoping of encountering. There's positivity in it too, some humor as well. Not even have to mention the stellar voiceover with the cast this game has. Only thing is that lip sync is way off for English voiceover, maybe because the original lip sync is for French language. Just an assumption, don't know. After getting used to it, it stops bothering, but English lip sync would add another layer of immersion for people playing in English without a doubt. World of 33 is very interesting. The artistic design makes it constantly unpredictable how new locations are going to be like, which new enemies and NPCs expeditions are going to encounter. Locations themselves are all over the place in a positive way. Very few are bland and uninteresting like caves or something like that. Most utilize the advantage of having artistic freedom of the broken world that doesn't abide by the natural laws with the fusion of the real and surreal, floating and underwater, colorful and grey. Really incredible location diversity that makes sense in this type of a world. Can't recall any of the locations sticking out negatively where I thought to myself, this place makes no sense. In Act 3, which is essentially an end game that is done quite well, the world opens up and many new locations become available. Very interesting ones at that. Not only the locations, but on the world map there's a bunch new enemies that pop up with new rewards. Endgame is well done as it stays in the confines of the story, but now with much more freedom to operate, which also means visiting some of the optional locations that are closely connected to the story. Just another example of how the game never feels disconnected from the story. It's impressive at times. Only downside are empty locations where there's only one screen and usually a music record to be picked up when they could have done something much better. Anything would be better really than those 4 or 5 empty ones. Regular locations on their own, even though aesthetically brilliant, are underwhelming exploration-wise. Quite linear with few side paths. Unlike a world map that opens up brilliantly and gives so many new things to explore, locations themselves are usually pretty average when it comes to exploration. Thankfully it is highly rewarding to go and explore, but the potential that these locations have considering the artistic freedom is unlimited. They haven't really utilized it as they could and should to open up new interesting hidden paths leading to new large areas and such. Though the artistic brilliance does compensate somewhat for the lack of proper exploration inside the locations. Now we come to combat. As I said in the early review, combat is great overall. It's a turn-based mix with active parry and dodge. Interesting combination that isn't so frequently used, and now I know why, but I'll get to that later. First of all, the combat presentation is high level. Just switching from menu to menu with a camera doing cinematic jumps works really great. The UI is awesome too. I get that some won't like such dynamic combat cameras in a turn-based game, but in my opinion it fits the game really well. On top of all that, the visual effects are fantastic and animations are great. Presentation-wise overall superb, but some won't like the style, which is fine. Subjective thing. But objectively I think it works great and fits the game. Next to normal attack there is also ranged attack that can be used whenever, which costs AP. Later on gradient attacks and gradient parries are unlocked. Plus of course the incredible abilities that take this whole system to a new level. Every ability from every character can be chained somehow, even though each character is quite unique, which adds a lot of depth. Couple debuffs and buffs are also in the game without going overboard with the status effects. Add to that active dodge and parry and you get highly engaging dynamic and strategic combat for a turn-based game. There's lots of possible effective team combinations with abilities that work well together, which can create tactical ability chaining across the whole team. It's impressive how detailed these skills are and what it can do in combination with Pictos. For example, you can base the whole team around dying and exploding on death, after which they are resurrected automatically. Or sacrifice everyone's health to do massive damage, or play at low HP to do increased damage. Protect party members from single target attacks while gaining shield with each parry, that in turn increases counterattack damage per shield. These abilities are not for quick glance. Every ability has some sense to it and can be incorporated nicely into the rotation. Very impressive stuff.
Show me what you can do.
Enemy design is quite good as well. Enemy diversity is decent, much better in the first 2 acts as it all starts to repeat in Act 3. Basically new enemies stop coming eventually, but there are enough to create different types of challenges. Often the player is going to face an enemy group where someone is putting shield on the party, next to the floating enemy that can only be reliably hit with ranged attack that summon orbs, and then the third enemy is the regular bozo that's there to mix it up with normal attacks. There's few combinations like that, or sometimes one nasty enemy is there to test your defenses. Considering that the defense is about active dodge and parry, enemy attacks need to be finely tuned and diverse. Some enemies have good attack diversity while some don't, and operate with just one or two attacks, which can play at times too predictable and therefore tedious, especially when going solo against such enemies. Some attacks have too narrow time windows that can create cheap difficulty where something can one-shot the party quite easily with a difficult dodge window to succeed. There's plenty of that. Most bosses are a different story though, with a good attack variety that is going to challenge the player's timing, muscle memory and builds. Most enemies and bosses also have mechanics that change the dynamic and strategy of the fight at least a little bit, which is commendable. There's some epic boss fights. Aesthetically, bosses are incredible with fantastic visual effects. This is where it was easy to see the game's biggest flaw, which is the balance, which ruins the difficulty and challenge. I've had debates about this with others, but honestly none have come with anything significant to defend such atrocious balance that affects the game's quality. Most have an, oh, it's a single player game so who cares viewpoint. What do you mean who cares? Why do you think there are 3 difficulty modes with a complex character progression system? So it plays like this? Every game with the difficulty modes should offer a proper somewhat balanced challenge on each mode. I've played expert from start to finish and balancing is the thing that ruined my enjoyment frequently because it doesn't require utilization of the combat system and the character progression system to the fullest potential. Or at least close to it. It just ends up as fireworks of big numbers that some players will look at with a grin on their face and clap.
My little Bill, he's a little Hercules. Show me muscle again. Oh, Hercules, 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 Hercules.
Unfortunately, bad balancing outside of a few fights either creates too much of a challenge for people that don't have the ability to create builds, or makes the game trivial 80% of the time if you have the ability to create competent builds. And these are not broken builds that exploit the game's mechanics, just regular builds that make the game trivial on expert mode where most bosses end up being a joke. Here's how for most players difficult is going to be. At first it's going to be hard because enemies do a lot of damage, but we also have the ability to evade that damage completely. Basically one shot kills most of the time from the enemy. Then after 4 or 5 hours things start to drastically change and players start to dominate easily. Then couple build ideas start to pop up and usually most builds work to too great of an extent and challenge evaporates. First few bosses in Act 1 and the last few bosses in Act 2 are going to be a challenge with a few fights in between. Everything else in between with a semi-competent build gets destroyed. Does that sound like good balancing? And then the end game has for the most part the best balance of the whole game, still not good but better at least. And then the last fight is a joke compared to the other ones. Most fights still end up being too easy though, even in Act 3. Seems to me most people just want to say they have beaten a game on highest difficulty mode, which is the reason why they don't want a more balanced game that would lead to more challenge. If you don't want the challenge, there are difficulty modes, so there is no excuse for such atrocious balancing. Developers have capped damage to 9,999 until Act 3, but that cap is easily reached already at levels 10 to 15, which is very early on, and enemies can't sustain such damage output. That after some time makes single hit abilities much less useful because cap works per hit and not per attack. Combat rarely breeds, for the lack of a better word. It starts and ends quickly. Also ruins progressive difficulty, meaning going through fights to reach the next checkpoint. Reason is a combination of easy and predictable fight outcome with autosave after every fight. So losing means nothing really, no downside to it. I don't mind people wanting to experience the story only without having to do anything else, no problem, that's why there are difficulty modes. Pick an easy mode and play, enjoy, no one is against it. But with great combat and character progression systems like this, there needs to be somewhat at least balanced challenge that is going to force people to adapt and overcome at times. Focus on something else rather than just big damage numbers, because there is potential for so much more strategically. Everything takes a backseat to DPS, which is a shame because abilities could offer much more than just a DPS hunt. This takes me to a character progression system that is amazing. Picto idea is brilliant. 3 slots for Pictos that grant huge stat bonuses and passive unique Picto bonus. By winning 4 times with pick to equipped, passive is forever learned and can be used on any party member. Passive pick to bonuses can be equipped as long as there is enough capacity, which is upgraded by items found throughout the world. There's a lot of pictos with varied effects which work great in combination with the abilities that are in the game, tons of stuff to play around with. Then there are weapons with unique bonuses that can change playstyles drastically. Variety is phenomenal as there are tons of weapons for each character. Attributes are there to balance the character out a bit, as bonuses from attributes are not as relevant as those from pictos, but weapons do scale from attributes, so there is enough significance to it to pay attention. Last thing is the abilities. 6 slots for abilities, and there's a lot of them for each character. We're well thought out with proper depth that offer lots of playstyle variety, team compositions, different focuses and such. Unfortunately affected by the bad balancing. Impressive thing that 33 does is that it removes the grind almost completely. Levels are gained by simply progressing and doing the side content. By exploring the world map and uncovering new locations that are similar to the player's level, fair levels are gained to match the levels of soon to be visited new locations. Really good way of reducing the grind so that the exploration's focus is not gaining levels, but defeating new challenges and finding new rewards that could perfect the build. Next section is the technical stuff. Game looks great, but upscaling can create ugly washed out colors at times. I think it got better with patches, but I'm not sure. Overall, the artistic side of things is brilliantly done, especially when everything is revealed, how it all makes even more sense in the end. Brilliant. Characters look fantastic, their facial expressions are like proper humans, animations are great, visual effects are top notch, although there are at times too many on the screen. But for 33 it works and it doesn't take away from it in my opinion. Audio work is high level too, fantastic voiceover, audio effects, music fits the game perfectly, again, brilliant work. Now here is something that I have to mention which might be only relevant to very few people. 33 is one of those rare games that was shutting down my PC and destroying save files in the process. So the whole time I was playing the game in fear with backing up saves frequently. I get that the vast majority won't ever experience anything like it, but it was my experience that I have to swallow in order to give a more objective score, even though all scores are subjective in the end, but at least there's a realistic range for every game. Because of that quite serious bug, I wanted to give 33 1 out of 10. Simply unacceptable and no excuses for a game to create such problems, because only one game ever created such issues for me, and that is Greedfall 2 Early Access. But it's in Early Access at least. Couple days ago a patch arrived that fixed that particular issue, so the game finally became stable after I was done with it basically. Point is that such a devastating bug wasn't due to my PC, but due to game's optimization or whatever. However, I understand that most won't have that issue, so the final score needs to reflect realistically how great this game is. And it's a great game, worthy of 8 out of 10 with potential at 9, which would translate as an amazing game. Scores are subjective, which means that some things that bothered me won't bother you as much and vice versa. For me, atrocious balancing really brought the game down significantly because the abilities and playstyle variety effectiveness suffered. 2 long stretches of the game where the outcome was predetermined and too predictable. Though it only brings 33 down to some degree because of the incredible things this game does, like the writing, story, proper human characters, very human overall story once it resolves, great combat, fantastic character progression system, awesome world with brilliant aesthetics, emotions that the game evokes. What a first game for Sandfall, truly a special one. I can guarantee that this is one of those games after being played that won't be forgotten for a long time. Games like these can usher potentially new age of original IPs done by gamers and not shareholders. 100% recommendation from me. Anyway, description for Patreon, subscribes our merch if you're interested in that, and thanks for watching.